Today's webinar is a phased approach to Legacy Modernization Part 3, testing and implementing your project. If you missed the first two episodes of this series, they are available for on-demand viewing at astadia.com under the Insights tab. Astadia has more than 25 years of experience with complex legacy modernization projects. We completed our first project way back in 1994, and since then we've had the pleasure of working with some of the largest organizations and enterprises in the country, including Raytheon, United Health, and the U.S. Army. Our speaker today is Craig Marble, a solution director in our legacy modernization practice. Craig has more than 25 years in the information technology industry, with more than 20 of those focused on legacy modernization projects. So Craig, the webinar is yours.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. And as Greg mentioned, today's webcast is part 3 of the phased approach to legacy modernization. And in this particular webcast, we are going to discuss testing, training, and implementing your modernization project. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick recap of what we covered up to this point to bring those who may have joined this one and haven't seen the earlier webcast. So in the first webinar, we discussed preparing for your legacy modernization project and specifically defining why you want to modernize, what your end state vision is, documenting where you are today in your modernization journey, and then using all those pieces to create a grid here that shows the value of your applications versus how they fit into your technical architecture and your cost structures, so that you can develop your modernization strategy going forward. And then the second one, we talked about actually executing your legacy modernization project, and this one focused on the people, the process, and the products associated with a modernization project, and talked about the circle of life over here on the right, which is a holistic approach to modernizing all the pieces of your application and all the pieces that your applications touch. So today we're going to focus on completing your project, and that is going into the testing, the training, and the cutover for your project. And we're going to start out with the testing aspect of it. So testing is sometimes forgotten in a lot of modernization projects. At the beginning of your test project, at the beginning of your modernization project, it is important to start thinking about your testing and creating your test cases, finding out what kind of test cases you have, where the deltas are in terms of what you don't have, and then coming up with new test cases, and also identifying or taking the task to create test data, because you can't do good testing without good data. So this is a really important aspect of the project, and you know, we had a project that we did with a customer, and as it turned out, the testing aspect was actually a larger effort than the modernization portion of that project, and it will vary from environment to environment, but don't underestimate it. In most cases, you will find that 80% of the issues that come out of your modernization project will come from about 20% of the code, because you're not changing everything, right? You're not rewriting an application, so you don't have to retest everything. You're not modifying every line of code, only certain lines of code. So there are certain areas that you should focus on in testing, and 80% of those errors that you'll get will come from about 20% of the code. And it's important to remember, though, that a lot of times when you find an error in one program, because of the nature of the project, that may fix many other issues in other programs that are experiencing the same error. It may not have been tested yet. So, for example, when you're doing a modernization project, you are modernizing many times the data access logic. So there may be a parameter in your data access code that is incorrect, and by fixing it, you have resolved that issue, and that may be used across many programs. So fixing it in one program can possibly apply to the rest of the programs and provide some economies of scale there when trying to resolve issues. So if we flashback for a minute on the code remediation piece in the prior webinar. There are only certain things that you modify in a lot of modernization projects, and most of those are around things like accessing new data sources. If you're going to move from, let's say, a hierarchical database on a Unisys mainframe to a SQL database on a Windows box. So you're going to be focusing your testing on these areas that you've made your change. So things like data access, any fields where you've modified a data field, like you've moved from comp to another field format on the distributed side, places where you're doing sorting that is different in ASCII and EBCDIC, and any places where you're doing new calls to the new operating system. So these are really the areas that you want to focus on. So you really only want to test what you need to. There's no point in exercising all of the logic because of the nature of the modernization project. It's really just a waste of time and money to do a full battery of tests on all function points. So what you want to focus on is only what you need to test. So try to arrange your test cases accordingly. You'll also want to remember to test your application-to-application interfaces. These next three things can sometimes get lost in the shuffle. So you will be interfacing with applications with some of the modified codes, so you'll need to test those. And also any partner or third-party interfaces, like maybe bank transfers or other types of financial transactions to a third-party entity or other business partner. And then, of course, nobody's going to appreciate your newly modernized application if it doesn't perform well. So it is important not only to test the functionality and verify that everything is working functionally correct, but it has to perform well, and you'll need to do some performance testing and load balancing testing to make sure that when you get to peak performance times a day, that your new system can handle that, because that can be a little hard to recover from if you, with much fanfare, say, "Oh, we've cut over to a new system," and everybody logs on, and it promptly comes to a screeching halt. Not very good. So some of the top mistakes on the testing side of things is underestimating the testing effort. That is number one. There have been a lot of projects that I've worked on where the testing is kind of put on the back burner because you're focusing on what you think is the real task at hand, which is modernizing the application. And then when you get to the testing part, you find that you've really underestimated the amount of time that it's going to take or the number of resources. Another big mistake is not preparing your test cases and your test data. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is because, well, you just need it to do proper testing, and you certainly don't want to get to a point where you're ready to test, but you can't because you don't have your test cases or your test data. But it's also important for even just the unit test. So there are circumstances where you may be doing your modernization and within one team, and that team needs to unit test before they start the integration testing. And if they don't have the data or the test cases to do that with, you either end up with more errors later on in the project, or you delay the unit testing altogether, and it'll slow your project down. So we have had situations like this in the past where the customer was not quite ready, didn't have the test cases or the test data for it. Meanwhile, we were modifying code and couldn't do the unit testing. So when we got to the point we were supposed to be doing our integration testing, we were actually doing essentially unit testing in integration testing, and it's not a fun time because people get worried because there are so many errors, and a lot of those errors would have been found earlier in the unit testing. So it's important. And then the flip side of this is testing too much. So we have had customers who just insist on testing end-to-end, full battery of tests that they would normally do for a completely rewritten system, and it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. We've even had one customer who wanted to test the test before we were allowed to test, which is a little crazy. So there's a good balance there, but just don't test too much. It's counterproductive. So let's move on to training. Training is another important aspect of this because you've got the developers who will presumably be maintaining this application once it's been modernized, and those developers who have a lot of knowledge about the business processes in those applications are now faced with, in some cases, an entirely new working environment for development. So you'll need to divide your training up according to the different folks you're going to be training, the different classes of folks. So for the developers, as I just mentioned, you may need to train them on new operating systems. You know, it could be you've got developers who are used to working either in a mainframe environment or maybe a Windows environment, and perhaps you've decided that you're going to start moving to a Linux environment. Maybe it's in the cloud, and Linux works really well in the cloud. So it could be your developers need to come up to speed on the Linux operating system or even a Windows operating system. I have had projects in the past where I worked with some really good folks, really excellent mainframe developers. But when it came to using Windows and their PC, it was basically a tunnel for the mainframe. It was a souped-up dummy terminal for them, and in fact, they didn't even really know how to use a mouse. In fact, they kept the mouse behind the terminal covered in dust because they did everything using keystrokes. So there could be, depending on your staff, a significant training exercise here. So operating system is one piece of it. Of course, you'll need to work on training the new development products in the environment. So if you are coming from a proprietary development environment, an IDE that is specific to a certain language that you're using, you may be moving to something like Visual Studio or Eclipse. And you may be going even from a character-based development environment to a visual-based environment, a GUI-based development environment. So there could be a significant learning curve here for some folks. So it's important to make sure that they get the appropriate training on the development products, and not just the products themselves, but the new procedures that go along with your new solution. So for example, in the old world, perhaps you had a series of steps that you went through to develop, compile, test, debug, and promote, and that process could change dramatically. It could be all mainframe-based and now going to distributed environment or cloud environment. So that will change. So it's not just teaching and training on the products themselves, but how those products are going to be used in your environment. So don't forget that aspect of it, because that's really important. Your testers are going to require new training as well. So it could be that you're rolling out a whole new set of testing products and environments for your testers to use. If that is not necessarily the case, you're still going to have changes in some of the same products that you're using on the development side. So for example, you may be using a containerized execution environment such as Micro Focus COBOL Server, and those and user environments need to be managed and need to be executed, say a batch program executed by a tester, and that will be done differently in the new environment. So the testers are going to need training on those products as well as the expected changes in the application and the processes. So in any modernization project, you want to try to keep things as similar to the way you're doing it today as possible from a business process perspective. You want to keep the change to a minimum to ease your way into the new modernized environment. But there will be some things that change. So perhaps some jobs may run in a different order, just by the nature of the modernization approach you've taken. Or maybe there have been some changes in the applications that were required. So perhaps some of the test results might look a little different than they did before. So the testers need to be trained on the expected changes in those processes and those applications. And then, of course, their process for testing is going to be different, just like it is for the developers. So it's important to cover that with your testers. And then, of course, we can't forget the operations folks and the users. So your operations folks, let's say they were used to running applications on the mainframe. They, of course, will now be running those and maintaining them and monitoring them in a new environment, perhaps in the cloud. So you need to provide training to your operations folks, not only on the products and the environments and the monitoring tools, but the procedures that they will follow if there is a problem. So they may have a procedure in place to handle an ab end. Well, that procedure may change, maybe not drastically, but will change in the new environment. So they need to understand what those differences are, as well as the expected changes in behavior, just like you did on the testing side. So if they see something that's unusual, maybe there's nothing wrong with it, it's just not something they're used to seeing, so they need to be trained on what to expect. And then, of course, there are going to be new backup, restore, and disaster recovery processes because you are making changes to how the applications work and in some cases where they reside. So all of that training needs to be provided as well. And then down to the users. Now, again, in a modernization project, we always try to take things in baby steps and try to initially do modernization of the infrastructure and, maybe moving from a mainframe to a distributed environment, or maybe moving from a mainframe to a cloud, but trying to minimize the impact on the business and your users, so you don't necessarily have to change interfaces to do that. For example, if they're using a terminal emulator today, they could still use that same terminal emulator tomorrow on the new environment. But there are, of course, changes that you will want to make eventually to make things look nicer and maybe work more efficiently through new user interfaces. So if you do have new user interfaces, your users will have to be trained in those new user interfaces. And if there are any expected changes in the workflow of how they do their jobs, that has to be covered with them as well. But again, I have if applicable on these because it won't always happen in modernization projects, but it can. So let's discuss some of the top training mistakes. So one of the biggest mistakes I see is training too early. So you have customers who are very excited about the new solution. They want their folks to be experts when they take over, as they should, but sometimes they will provide training too early. So you have a bunch of folks who go through, a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of training, depending on how complex your environment is and how extensive your modernization project is. But if you get training on, let's say, Visual Studio and an IDE for maintaining and developing, let's say, COBOL in a distributed environment, and then you don't use that tool again for 3 months, by the time that 3 months goes by for the cutover, you're going to lose a lot of what you learned in that class. And a lot of times, it is not practical to have those folks working on the project to try to get them ramped up on the product because it could cause delays in the schedule itself. So the timing is important. It needs to be far enough in advance that you can make sure that they have the tools and the expertise that they need to maintain the product once it goes live, but not so far in advance that they forget everything. Okay. Another mistake that we see is omitting the unique processes of that particular company's environment. And I mentioned this before, that you can train your folks on how to use a product, but it's important to train them how to use it in your environment. So omitting that from your training plan is a big problem. And then the last one is a classroom overload. So it gets counterproductive when you have more than, say, 10 or 12 folks in a classroom. You'll have a lot of questions. You're working with folks who are new to possibly an entire new platform. One instructor, even with a couple of assistants, can be going full out with a class full of 10 or 12 folks. So anything more than that is just going to be too much to handle, and I do not recommend it. So now we're going to talk about cutover. So you've worked on your project, you've worked hard, you've got the testing, you feel very confident, and you're ready to do cutover. Well, a cutover plan is essential. I know it sounds kind of obvious, but it is sometimes something that is left sort of to the end of the project. You know, they say, well, we'll worry about that later. Well, don't put it off too long, because cutting over can be more complex than you think. You'd be surprised once you list out all of the areas that are affected by your modernization project. That list can get pretty extensive. The different groups, whether it's the database management folks and the operations team, and there are a lot of moving parts behind the scenes that can be affected by your modernization project. So I would recommend that you start working on the cutover plan no later than halfway through the project, because it will take time. So what we've done in the past is have our customers work with them to list all of the areas that are affected by your change, all the changes that you're making, and give them information on what it is that you're doing, when the cutover date's going to be, and have them appoint a representative. So maybe in the database management group and the operations group and all of the other groups that you're affecting, have them sort of represent appoint some sort of representative that you can interface to. And then set up some meetings to coordinate what's going on, to know, okay, if we cut over on this date, what are the things we have to think about? Or the steps that we go through to do the cutover, what order do we need to do them in? Well, you can't do step A before you do step B, because group A has a constraint or requires something to be in place before they can do their work. Things like that. All of that needs to be taken into consideration when you're developing your plan. So once you've got the correct staff identified, list all of the steps that are required to run through a project plan. So that means everything from preparing the environment to actually doing the code migration to the data migration, all of the different pieces that need to happen, and cover those with everybody in the group to verify that you've got everything, and then come up with some estimated timings for each step, because you want to make sure that you can perform your cutover in the time that you have. Usually it's a weekend or a long holiday weekend, maybe a 3-day weekend. So you need to make sure, depending on the size of your project, whether you have the time that you need to do this, and part of that is estimating the time that is required for each step. And then one of the things we did at one of our last projects is they set up an internal cutover hotline, which was publicized to the entire cutover team. And what I mean by that is they chose somebody's phone, and that number was the hotline that you called. If you were working on an aspect of the cutover and you ran into a problem, you would call that hotline. Or if you completed a task and you called that hotline to confirm that it was done. So it was actually nice. It was a little bit easier than emailing back and forth and all over the place. So I've got here a sample plan from one of our previous projects, and this is what I would call the high-level view of the plan. So you've got your days spread out by 2 days. In this case, we've got a Saturday and a Sunday. And you basically just, using a linear representation, represent everything that you think needs to happen that's been verified, and what needs to happen, where the overlaps are, et cetera, and map that out day 1 and day 2. And this is sort of a high-level view that people can look at and get an idea of what's going on. And then drilling down further into that, you will have a more detailed view, and this is really the step-by-step excuse me, task of everything that needs to take place during that cutover implementation. And you can see here that this is broken down by hour. You can see there's a 12 a.m. On the top left and a 12 p.m. on the top right. So this actually then is broken down further in this particular case by 15-minute increments. And you'll see here that there is some color coding based on the department or the organization involved. And then we have the tasks listed in here, as well as the person who is responsible for that task and how long we think that task is going to take. So you can make your cutover plan as simple or as complex as you want. I would caution against getting too complex, but in this particular cutover, it was a complex cutover weekend. So we really had to plan it all out step by step, as I said, in 15-minute increments. So once you got all of this in place, it is important to conduct some dry runs. So there are a lot of benefits to dry runs. One is that it validates the tasks and the order in which you perform those tasks. So you've got a plan, you say step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 at certain times. So it does validate that that was successful. It also will confirm the timings, the estimates that you've put up. So you may say, okay, I think it's going to take 2 hours to do our database conversion, and then in a dry run, you may find out, oh my gosh, it actually took 10 hours. So, you don't want those ugly surprises on the actual cutover date. And in fact, for the data migration, we have done extra dry runs just for the data, just to make sure that, because the data really was the most important aspect of this, we did, I don't know, like 3 or 4 dry runs on just the data itself. So we would come in on the weekends and during low volume times actually perform data migrations, mock data migrations, using real data to hone it and tune it, and then get the real time that it was going to take. And then once you've done your dry runs, do a post-mortem analysis on it. So we'd get together as a team and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do next time better? So things to remember, and not just your dry runs, but also in planning, et cetera. A lot of tasks can run in parallel. If you're like me, you tend to think serially, and I always think I need to do this first, and task 2 next, and task 3 third, but that isn't always the case. There are tasks that can run in parallel, and that will save you a lot of time. So be sure to identify those early and then plan accordingly. Data migration, in my mind, is the hardest and the highest priority piece of your cutover. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the data is sacred, right? The data applications are important, but there's nothing more important than the data and the integrity of the data. So the data migration is really what you plan around, especially if it's a large data migration. We did a data migration of something like 18 plus terabytes of data. And while you're migrating it, you're converting it, you're reformatting it, you're validating it, et cetera. So we really planned the entire cutover exercise around the data migration. Moving programs into place, a lot of that can be done up front, right? You can set up your production environment even days beforehand, because it's not being used until you cut over. So a lot of that stuff can be done up front. So just remember that data migration is going to be the hardest and the highest priority. Don't forget to change the front ends in your client apps. That can be something that falls through the cracks. You get fired up, you get your new environment set up, and people log in, and lo and behold, they don't get a response from the host, and it's because their client applications are still pointing to a machine that is no longer servicing them. So don't forget about those. And then, of course, don't forget your external partner interfaces. You'll want to do some dry runs for them as well to make sure that you have the timings for that, and you know what kind of issues to expect. So for top mistakes in terms of cutover, I know I talked a lot about the value of dry runs, but we have had customers who have done too many dry runs, right? So we had customers who literally planned 5 dry runs, which it just boggles my mind. It just makes no sense. You know, kind of after the 3rd dry run and you get it up and everything's running, you know, I'm of the opinion of just, you know, cut the switch, stick a fork in it, and call it done. I mean, why do a post-mortem if everything went well and you were prepared for it? So don't do too many dry runs. They are important, but it can be overkill. Don't deviate from your proven plan. Which kind of leads into the next one, which is making unauthorized or unproven changes in mid-flight. So we have had a case in the past. It was a very tight cutover period. It was over a 2.5 day. People working round the clock. I was literally up for 48 hours straight, and we're getting close to the end, and we finished up our data migration, and somebody saw something in one of the data tables that they thought looked a little funny. It was perfectly fine, but they thought it looked funny and took it upon themselves to make a change, which of course screwed up everything because we did not get the results we expected, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what went wrong. So unauthorized changes during a cutover can spell disaster. And so any unproven changes during your cutover can also be a major problem. So just keep that in mind. So with that, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Greg?
Thanks, Craig. Thanks very much. We only have one question right now, and that is around the training piece of it. Is there a preference or a best practice around doing live training versus self-directed online training?
It really depends on the product. So there are some products. So for example, if your folks are used to using mainframe for development, and you decide that you're going to move to a Visual Studio environment or an Eclipse environment, there is some value in directing your folks to download an academic copy of Visual Studio, and of course the Eclipse framework is free, and doing some online training. But I think the best way forward from that is going to be teacher-based training. Now, some of that could be done remotely. I personally think that classroom style works the best. That's just a preference for me. And especially when you get to tools that are very specific to your modernization project. As an example, if you're going from mainframe COBOL to microfocus COBOL, you're going to need training not only on the platform frameworks such as Visual Studio or Eclipse, but you're also going to need training on the microfocus plugins to those particular frameworks.
Right.
And that kind of training is, I think, best done in a teacher-student environment, classroom environment. Doesn't have to be, but I think that works better that way.
Okay, good. And Craig, that's the only question we had tonight.
Okay. All right. So we do have a part 4 coming up, which probably should have been the first part, which was the value of modernizing your legacy systems. We actually thought about this after we started the series and thought, boy, this would be something good. So that's going to be part 4, and Greg can give you the details on that coming up.
Yeah, and part 4 will be coming up in about a month's time. And the whole idea behind this webinar is really to help a CIO get engagement and commitment from the rest of the C-level people by truly understanding who all within the enterprise is really going to benefit from modernizing the legacy systems. It certainly is not just the CIO. So we'll get a little bit more into detail on that in the next webinar. And with that, if there's no more questions, I want to thank everybody for attending, and we'll see you shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.